and welcome to this lesson in organizational communication, this one being about communication networks and channels. A network, let's first define what the difference is between a network and a channel. A network are patterns, flows of pathways of communication, interaction, and these are both formal and informal and can occur spontaneously. So these are just who talks to who, how communication flows. A channel, however, is more organizationally sanctioned and used to structure the flow of information and messages. Now, these are usually prescribed by the organization and restricted. So, um, this isn't. Mm, this is usually like a chain of command kind of channel, or from information that comes to you from HR, information that comes to you from specifically from management downward. So these are um, much more formalized, kind of, and usually follow the structure of the organization. Okay, and maybe as we talk about these a little bit more, they'll become a little bit more clear to you, the difference between a network and a channel. Okay, let's first start off talking about networks. Okay, well, there's a little bit of vocabulary that we use to talk about networks. One is coupling. A network can be loosely or tightly coupled. Um, and that just kind of means like how strong is the network. Um, a highly structural network of people, say like people who talk within the department, um, that is interdependent. So, in other words, they can't do their job necessarily without talking to one another. So the network is interdependent in that we need each other to be able to complete our tasks. We need to talk to each other. We can't just do our job in isolation of talking to anybody else. So that would be an interdependent network. If it's structural, that means it's embedded within the organizational structure. And that is a kind of network that we would consider tightly coupled. Um, Two people who just kind of meet and talk to one another around the water cooler, who don't necessarily have to talk to each other to do their job. Maybe they're not even in the same department. But they would be in each other's network because they talk to each other. They exchange information. There's a flow of communication there. Well, that would be an example of a loosely coupled network. We also talk about the level of connectedness. Um, and this is when network members identify with the goals of others and they are psychologically interdependent. So, not just necessarily that they need to talk to one another interdependent to do their jobs, but they kind of feel interdependent with one another. They feel a more sort of mental kind of connection with each other. Um, and that's called connectedness. So how much do I identify with you, how much do I identify with your goal, and how much kind of psychologically or emotionally interdependent I am with you. Like, I don't have to talk to you to do my job, but I feel like I need to connect with you somehow to be able to function as a human being and as an employee. Clusters are both coalitions, people who come together for a cause, and by cause I don't mean social cause. I mean they come together to do something. They come together to complete a task. They have a reason necessarily for coming together. Maybe they're on a committee with each other. Maybe they are in the same department. Maybe they're on a project team. So that's a coalition or a clique. And a clique is usually a social relationship with one another. So they come together because they enjoy each other's company. They're friends. They feel that they have some sort of non-work related relationship with each other. That would be a clique. Um, Another kind of vocabulary word that deals with networks is called a weak tie. And this is someone outside of the network or clique who can provide an objective view. So they're maybe in the network, but they're not in the clique or the coalition or the cluster. Or maybe they're completely outside of the network. They can still be in the organization, or they can be completely out of the organization. Who can provide sometimes an objective view. And this is needed sometimes when there is a high degree of connectedness within the people within the network or the cluster. And it helps stop groupthink, which is a term we use in the study of group communication, that when people are so cohesive and so connected with each other that they all start to think alike. And sometimes that can be a good thing, but sometimes that's a bad thing when you don't use your collective kind of group wisdom to come up with alternative ideas. You're not thinking differently enough to be able to be creative. In other words, instead of five heads working on a project team that all bring a unique perspective and bring differences of opinions and bring different ideas. In groupthink, all those five heads kind of become one big head, and then you lose some of that benefit of a group. So sometimes but you know who is a weak tie probably to you? Your friends outside of work, your spouse, your romantic partner can be a weak tie, because there's somebody that you come to and you talk about what's going on at work, but they're outside of your clique, they're outside of your network, they're outside of your organization. So sometimes they're a little bit more objective than you are, being inside of the network or the organization or the clique. So you know what this is. This is anybody that you kind of go to outside of the situation to kind of explain things to them and maybe get their viewpoint on it, because you're too close to it all being inside of the problem. All right, there are different roles within the network. One is called a liaison, and I'm going to show you a little example of this here in a minute. One is called a liaison, and this is people who connect people from two different clusters or two different groups within the overall network. Is a liaison. So somebody who is kind of connecting the different, within the network, but connecting the different clusters. A gatekeeper is someone who regulates the flow of information, decides what messages will go on to a cluster, but can also prevent information overload because they provide a very important filter. um, so in other words, they kind of pass on messages that they think this cluster needs to know. But at the same time, if the gatekeeper thinks that something is unimportant and doesn't pass it on to the cluster, maybe somebody else in the cluster actually would think that that was important or did need that piece of information. So gatekeeper can be good on the one hand, because they keep you just from being completely bombarded with a ton of information. But on the other hand, the gatekeeper is the one who decides what messages go on to the cluster and what messages leave the cluster. And sometimes you might disagree with what messages needed to be passed on and which ones didn't. A representative is someone sometimes also known as a broadcaster, and this is a person that connects the network with outside of the organization. Oftentimes people in public relations, people in advertising, they're representatives or broadcasters because they're passing on information from the network to outside of the organization entirely. Not just outside of the network, but even outside of the organization. A star is kind of an opinion leader within the cluster, somebody who has a lot of contact typically with everybody in the cluster, is kind of a central person sometimes in the cluster. Sometimes it's not even their position in the network. Sometimes it's just their force of personality or the type of person they are. They're very social. They know everybody. So sometimes it doesn't have as much to do with where they are in the network as much as the kind of person that they are. A cosmopolite is someone who has a high degree of interaction with the network's external environment, sometimes also known as a boundary spanner. A cosmopolite usually is different from a representative, because a representative um, um, has contact with people outside of the organization. A cosmopolite is within the organization but has a high degree of communication with people outside of the direct network. So a cosmopolite is typically somebody, and maybe you know someone like this, who works for the organization, works in a particular department, but knows people all across the organization, knows people in different departments, knows people in different geographic locations, knows people, they just know a lot of people within their own network and even outside of the network. And finally, an isolate is somebody who is decoupled from the network completely. They're kind of out of touch with the rest. They're removed from the regular flow of information. Sometimes they purposefully do this. Sometimes they're just not social people. They're kind of shy. They are loners. They don't like to kind of be in on things, but sometimes it is a result of their working situation. For example, a lot of times telecommuters are in danger of becoming isolates because people just forget to tell them things. They're not at meetings sometimes where things get decided. They're not privy to all the break room conversation, and so sometimes they become kind of decoupled from the network, and they only get things passed on to them from official emails. They lose a lot of that face-to-face kind of flow of information, certainly, but even sometimes something will be decided at a meeting, and you'll forget to send an email out to the telecommuter to let them know what was decided. So they become an isolate even in formal communication because people just forget about them sometimes. So let's take a look. I just kind of made up a hypothetical kind of network here. And all these people are in a network. Maybe they are all members of a same department. They can be members of the same project team. Maybe So let's take a look at, looking at this network and put roles to these folks. So Jim here, notice, is an isolate. As we talked about, Jim is decoupled from the whole rest of the network, and there's nobody necessarily communicating with Jim. Okay, let's look down here at Ava. Ava, it would be considered a liaison because Ava is talking with Rob, who talks to Sid and Dan, and so Ava is the only liaison that's connecting Rob, Sid, and Dan to the rest of the network. So remember, a liaison is somebody who connects different clusters within the network, and so Ava would be considered a liaison. Take a look at Bob here. Bob is a classic gatekeeper. Because Bob is the connection of the other clusters, the Ava and Gus cluster, the Max and Zoe cluster, and the Rob, Sid, and Dan cluster, to the other cluster of Kim, Ann, Ted, and Pam. And so he is a gatekeeper because he probably takes everything from the three other clusters and decides which one goes on to his cluster. And which ones leave his cluster to go on to the three other clusters. So Bob would be considered a classic gatekeeper. And finally, look at Ted's central position within his network. Now, like I said, Ted might be there because he talks to everybody else. But notice, that's a pretty, highly coupled and highly communicative cluster. Lots of people are talking to lots of people within that cluster. But Ted is the one who's talking to everybody. We don't have a line between Pam and Ann, so maybe they don't talk very often. We don't have a line between Kim and Bob, but everybody talks to Ted. And so he is in a perfect position. And if he is also by personality a very highly social person, a very talkative person, a person who does do a lot of just communicating in general, that and people believe him and trust him, that might make him a star. So you can kind of see there now, looking at this, how a network works and how people within the network. Now, does that mean that, say, Zoe doesn't know Kim? Yeah, they know each other and maybe know each other enough to speak or say hello to one another, but we don't necessarily put them together in our network in terms of being connected or coupled with one another because they don't necessarily share information on a regular basis. All right, turning our attention then to channels. Sorry. There are one-way channels, okay, and that could be downward, okay, and remember in our old classical style of management, all communication was downward, so that means a manager giving information to the subordinate. Or you can have two-way channels, which would be both downward and upward. So information flows down from the manager to the subordinate, but information also flows up from the subordinate to the manager. Usually channels are the prerogative of management. Usually if you're the subordinate, you don't get to say whether or not you have a two-way channel. You don't get to say who you get to communicate to. You don't get to say who you report to. So channels are usually determined, by the organizational structure and usually by the management themselves. Channels also have what we call an intervening variable. And what that means is how a particular channel affects the message. And this is something that kind of goes back to classic, the medium. How does the medium or the channel or how you communicate with somebody affect the message? When I talk about this sometimes in the interpersonal communication class, I say, what's the difference if somebody breaks up with you face to face, someone breaks up with you over an email, someone breaks up with you over the text, someone breaks up with you over the phone? Well, the message might be exactly the same, but the message is changed by the channel or the medium in which the person chose to use. And so here we have that when we talk about organizational channels. Because sometimes a message is very much influenced by or very much an intervening variable of the message because being determined by which channel did you use, what was your timing in using that channel, how did you edit the message based on the channel. In other words, if you were texting something, did you leave stuff out? And how did we abstract within the channel? So, like a abstract being that the channel itself is not conducive to that particular kind of message. That there's it's too easily misinterpreted. It was something that should have been done probably face to face, but put in an email, it just leaves itself to too much differences of interpretation. So let's look at some of these channels. First of all, let's look at downward communication. Well, what are some of the functions of downward communication? What are some of the things that when managers talk to subordinates or management talks to lower levels in the organization, what are some of the things that need to be done in that downward function of communication? Well, first of all, you need instructions on how to do your job. Okay, so management has to give you instructions on how to do something. Management also needs to give you some job rationale, like why something needs to be done. Okay, management needs to communicate downward about procedures and policies and practices. Management needs to give you feedback on your performance. And management needs to give you information regarding organizational missions and goals. Okay, that's usually for them to decide. Sometimes they might seek your input in upward communication about what an organizational goal should be or might be, but typically the upper levels of the organization decide on organizational missions and goals and communicate that downward. What are some of the barriers to downward communication? Well, for a long time under that classical model of communication, managers only told employees what they thought employees needed to know. And so then There were things that employees thought they needed to know, but if management thought that they didn't need to know that, they didn't tell them. So it's completely up to the discretion then of management to decide, oh, that's important, people should know that, or no, I don't think employees need to know that. And, you know, they're obviously that's fraught with difficulties because employees would oftentimes disagree about what they needed to know about, from management. However, on the other side of that, let's say you have a manager who says, no, 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 I'm not going to act as that gatekeeper. I'm going to go ahead and tell my employees everything that I know. Well, employees can get very easily burdened with information overload. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes there's a lot of information that comes down that you're like, why do I need to know this? I don't need to know this. This has nothing to do with my job. This has nothing to do with, and it might be something that the manager needs to know about, but you didn't necessarily need to know about it or care about it. So typically, employees only want information that's relevant to them. So you have this conundrum. You have this what should managers do? Should they communicate everything and then let employees decide what's relevant and then potentially overload employees with, too much information, communication overload? Or should the manager act as the gatekeeper and decide what the employees need to know? Well, again, employees might disagree about, hey, I needed to know about that, or I would have wanted to know about that. So what most experts recommend is something called team development, which is including employees' decisions about what they want to know, what they want communicated to them, is seen as a solution. I don't know what I have seen is a ST solution. I don't even know what I have there. But what I mean is a solution to our conundrum about whether or not managers decide what employees need to know or tell them everything. How about asking employees, hey, what do you guys need to know about? What do you want to know about? What kind of things do you need passed on to you? And what kind of things do you think I should filter out? And typically that needs to happen. You need to have a nice communication flow between the manager and the subordinate, with the employees being asked, what do they want to know about? So what's our functions then of upward communication? So this is communication flowing from subordinates upward to management. Well, upward communication provides 4 types of messages. First of all, suggestions. Suggestions about ways that things can be done, suggestions about changes to policies and procedures, suggestions about just that, what kind of communication subordinates want to know about, what subordinates are doing. Okay, if you have to give status reports to your manager about where you are, what's your status on projects and assignments and things like that. Unsolved work problems, so something that you couldn't solve yourself and you need management to solve for you. You need a piece of equipment, you need a higher budget, you need a new employee, you need permission from above for something. So anything a problem that you cannot solve yourself, you need to go to your management for. But also look at this last one, how subordinates feel about each other and the job. And if you remember back to talking about things that employees think is the job of their supervisors, remember that one thing that employees expected their supervisors to do as a part of their job was to help resolve interpersonal conflicts between employees, and to serve as a sounding board for employees about their job and their career progression and things like that. What are some of the benefits of upward communication? Well, organizations need to realize that the person actually doing the job is an important resource. And it's just, for lack of a better word here, folks, it's just stupid of any manager not to seek feedback from the employees. It's just stupid. I wish I had a better word for it than that, but I honestly can't think of anything else. If a manager is so egotistical that they think they have all the answers and that they think that they always know better than everybody else, that is just insane, because the people actually doing the work, the people actually on the ground, are the ones who know best about what goes on there. And any manager worth his weight or worth her weight would seek out their employees for that kind of information in making decisions, in setting up assignments and setting deadlines. Um, it just seems to me that, especially for middle management, to be able to have that information, because I can't even imagine upper management not asking middle management for status updates and things like that that are going on at the bottom level, and or at the lower levels, I should say. And any manager who's not asking for that information is really stupid. Frontline employees are directly in contact with the equipment, the processes, and the customers, so they can make suggestions regarding various work processes. They're working with that equipment. They're living those processes. They're talking to the customers, um, and so they know, better than anybody what is going on. Supervisors can check on effectiveness of instructions and progress and ongoing activities. And supervisors also need to be aware of subordinates' achievements, all the time, not just at performance evaluation time. A good manager, wants to know when his or her employees have small successes so that they can, reward those. Um, Part of that, like we said, is that important information about how employees feel about each other in the job. And issues, real or imagined, require effective communication between supervisors and subordinates. And any good supervisor wants to know what's going on with the subordinate. They want to know, and they should make it very friendly for subordinates to come to them with concerns, problems, questions, um, gripes even. Because if they have that "don't nobody bring me no bad news" attitude, then they're gonna miss out on all of that information that's going on down there, and they're not going to be able to foster good relationships with their employees. A survey of 5,200 high performers, okay, so this is people that are doing a great job and very highly skilled. So, not your slackers, not your losers, not people that an organization wouldn't care if they left, right? These are high performers. A survey of 5,200 high performers revealed that 75% of them, at some point in their career, left an organization because they felt that it was not safe to say how they felt. Wow. So people that an organization would want to keep, 75% of them at some point in their career left the organization because it was too risky. It was not friendly. It was too unsafe to speak up. If something wasn't right, an instruction wasn't right, a process wasn't right, a procedure wasn't right, or they were just feeling uncomfortable or not valued in their job. Wow. I think organizations need to know about that. And for the purposes of this class, I know that we're taking the perspective of the peon, right? The person, toward the bottom. But hopefully you guys in your career at some point, you won't be at the bottom anymore. You will have been moved up. You will be in positions where you'll be supervising other people. And I hope that you'll remember this information so that you're not a manager who loses some of the best people because you don't make it safe for them to speak up. Um, well, what are some of the barriers to upward communication? Well, risk. I mean, what's going on that uh, the bottom level won't speak up? Well, first of all, when employees admit that they're having trouble, they often risk being seen as incompetent, right? I mean, if you're the one saying, I'm having a problem, I don't know how to do this isn't working, and they're afraid that if they say that too often, their manager is going to start to have a different opinion of them. A good manager will let employees know that that's not going to be the case. Some managers have a shoot the messenger philosophy, that some employees learn that complaints and suggestions are viewed as rocking the boat. And, that is that manager who has that, God, I'm mixing in a whole lot of analogies here and different expressions, but, there's that famous song, don't nobody bring me no bad news. And so, another way of looking at this is there's a Japanese saying that says the nail that stands up is the one that gets hammered down. So employees don't want to be the one who stands up and speaks up because they're afraid that they're going to be hammered down. And finally, sometimes employees get a kind of punishment for speaking up because there is a very subtle reprisal or reprimand, if you will, or punishment that is management asks, you raise it, you solve it. As delegation then becomes a way to punish the subordinate who brings the problem to his or her attention, to the manager's attention. So in other words, I'm afraid to bring it up to you because I'm afraid you're going to assign it to me to fix it. I don't want to point out that something's broken because I don't know how to fix it, but I'm afraid you're going to make me have to fix it. And then I'm going to be stuck in a situation trying to fix something that I don't know how to fix, and I'm set up for failure. And that's going to make me look bad. Or maybe my plate's too full and I don't have time to do anything else. And I'm afraid that if I bring it up, you're going to add that to my plate of things to do or to fix that I just simply don't have time to. So I'm not going to bring it up because I'm afraid you're going to assign it or delegate it to me. Another barrier to upward communication is distortion. Many studies find that because of this risk, upward communication is often distorted, with a minimizing of unfavorable information and exaggeration of favorable information. We're going to do an activity in this class that shows how upward communication can become distorted. And so I'll leave that off to us doing that activity in class. Increasing trust and reducing risk are primary methods of reducing distortion. So I'm going to hearken back to this when we do this activity in class about upward communication and how it can become distorted. All right, and then finally, we've been talking about upward and downward, but we also have horizontal communication. And horizontal communication is communicating to people on your same level. So this would be communicating to peers. What are some of the functions of horizontal communication? Well, obviously, working together on a task, so we're coordinating the task, problem solving, sharing information, conflict resolution, and also rapport building. And we want to be able to get along with our teammates. We want to be able to get along with our own peers.